My breath was ragged as Wade and I rushed down the hall. When Paige's and Eric's voices were reduced to static, we threw caution to the wind and took off. Whatever adrenaline that ran through us, however, was quickly extinguished when, after what must have been 10 minutes of running, we had only seemed to make it about 100 feet, the moonlight illuminating the doorway to the kitchen. What the fuck, I heaved out, clutching my knees and gasping for whatever little sips of filtered air this mask would give me. It's hallucinogenic. Gotta be. Wade wasn't doing any better. He was upright, but only by leaning against the wall. He coughed loudly, clearing his throat, doing his best to hold down whatever he had in his stomach. After a moment or two, we both began to breathe properly and get our heads on right. Whatever this place is, wherever we are, we can't get there fast, I said as I pulled some more chem lights out of my pack and cracked one. We take it slow. Drop these every 100 paces. I could hear Wade grunt and exhale deeply as he nodded. Good idea. We need to see if we can get back into signal range too. First things first. Lead the way. I got your 6. We began making our way down the hall. For whatever reason, the house decided to give us passage as the light behind us started to dim. After a few minutes, we finally reached the end, coming up onto a single, heavy, oak door. Careful, Wade said just loud enough for the mic to pick up. Almost at a whisper. I didn't answer audibly, just giving a single nod as I turned the handle. Slowly, I inched the door open, pointed my muzzle inside, and began scanning the room, without my needing to say so. I heard the crack of a chem light as Wade tossed it as far as he could. The light that came from where it landed showed high shelves, a large wooden desk, and books as far as the eye could see. We had found our way into the madman's study. We crept slowly inside. Everything on the walls hung still, caked in dust. This place looked like it hadn't been used in years. Don't believe it, Wade said as he kicked over some books stacked on the ground. What do you mean? I asked, looking back at him as I made my way over to the desk. All this ... shit. He waved his hands, gesturing to the room around us. I don't buy it for a second that any of this is real. Something here is fucking with the occipital and temporal lobes of the brain, simulating a psychotic break. We could be running around in a broom closet for all we know. I said as I began rifling through the drawers of the desk. There wasn't much inside save for a few empty binders and post-it notes. And what makes you an expert on human psychology? In this case, it's psychiatry. And the master's degree from Harvard does, he said matter-of-factly. I could almost see the smirk on his face as he no doubt could see the look of shock on mine. Dude, I said after taking a moment. Just how many jobs have you had? Enough to know what I'm talking about, he said, trying hard to stifle a laugh. Let's just say I've been around long enough to have diversified my portfolio. Sounds like it. So how do we beat it? I cracked open a few more chem lights as I made my way to the far end of the room. Wade took a moment to think before sounding equal parts frustrated and defeated. In layman's terms, you don't. You can try to offset it, but to completely pull yourself out, you have to be pulled out by someone else. Of course we do. I thought they could never make anything easy. Something changed as I took the steps into the inky darkness. Things weren't just dirty and unused. They were rotting. The shelves were cracked and chipped, covered in a mass of termites that feasted on the remains. The books went from old to archaic. I picked one up and thumbed through the pages. I couldn't even read it. The lettering faded into almost translucent paper. The spine was non-existent. This wasn't a library anymore, but a tomb. I had to fight the urge to empty my supply of light in this one room. I didn't want to be here. This wasn't supposed to go like this. Trapped here in this house of horrors. I clutched a light tight to my chest as I made my way onward towards the far wall. The shelves that lined my left and my right were replaced by a large stone fireplace. You could have tossed a bear in there to roast with how wide it was. Off to the right-hand side stood another heavy black door, and above it, hooked onto the massive stone chimney, was another photo. This one was similar to the last. It was blown to massive proportions, like some kind of twisted family portrait. There was Raoul, standing there all dignified and still, well, human. It was hard to imagine that this face of scientific nobility would be morphed and twisted into the creature we were now hunting. The kid looked largely the same as before. It was just, well, I couldn't put my finger on it, but he seemed terrified. Like his facial features and posture were the same, but he just, well, I could feel it. My eyes instinctively shot towards the woman. It was then that I knew what had changed. Her sweet, motherly smile was now gone. In its place sat 2 rows of thin, jagged teeth, curled into a Joker-like grin. Her eyes cast down towards the boy, like she was sizing up her next meal. The once sleek long hair was now matted in parts, and wild in the rest, protruding in every direction, giving her the appearance of some sort of demented mad scientist. Wade came up from behind, startling me. For someone so big, he sure could be silent when he wanted to. What do you see? He said as his eyes scanned the picture, trying to discern what it was showing me. Well, I can tell you what it's not, I said, looking over to him. He responded with a single understanding nod. It felt comforting to know I wasn't going through this alone. Sure. Wade's brain wasn't being strapped down and forced to go through a Rorschach test every 20 minutes. But he was here. That's what mattered. So I said, after turning away from the portrait, facing him fully. Offsetting. How do we do it? Simple, he said, holding his gaze a bit longer on the picture before turning to me. Just think of something ridiculous, something that can't be twisted and corrupted. All right, I said skeptically. Like what? He thought for a moment before letting out a small chuckle. What? Well, what's an embarrassing story from your childhood? His question threw me for a loop. I nearly forgot that we were lost in a funhouse stuffed with Heaven's Gate rejects. You're serious? I asked after a moment. As a heart attack. I racked my brain, trying to think. Oh, I guess when I got caught wearing my sister's cheerleading outfit one time when I was 6. There was silence for a moment. I saw Wade's laughter before I heard it, his body heaving back and forth. He let out a massive howl and clutched his stomach, laughing his ass off. Phew, God, I gotta hear the outcome of this. Nah man, that wasn't the deal. What about you? Huh, what stupid shit did little Wade get into? It took him a moment to stop laughing. Honestly, this conversation was making me feel a little bit better. It was easier to forget the last 30 minutes, even for a moment. Wade wiped his eyes as he looked at me. When I was little, I got attacked by a group of chickens. My grandpa had some that I would feed when I came to visit. I was about 4 carrying a bucket one day when I tripped and got covered in feed. Little fuckers had a field day. It was my turn to laugh now. I clutched my stomach and howled, imagining the giant Wade being bested by someone foot hens. I heard Wade's boots crunch on the floor as he put his hand on my shoulder. You laugh, but those things are ferocious. Feel better? I nodded and wiped my eyes. Yeah, I said, standing up and turning towards the door. Let's go put a bullet in this thing. He swept his hand towards the door as he positioned himself behind me. Lead the way, and remember, be aggressive. Be aggressive. Fuck you, I said with a chuckle as I twisted the handle and threw the door open. The hallway we found ourselves in now was the complete opposite of the one before. Instead of the dark and dingy tunnel that we ran from, this place was a warm and cozy reprieve. Gone was the rotting hardwood. Instead, it was replaced by a rolling red carpet leading to a massive white door with 6 black dots painted in a circle around it. Candelabras dotted the many countertops and side tables in view, rendering our chem lights useless. Pictures covered the walls from top to bottom, all displaying the same unsettling image from the room before. Is it weird that this place is creepier than where we just came from? I said as I took a step inside. Maybe the house is settling for enticing over sheer terror, Wade whispered out as we made our way further in. Doubt it. I did my best to avoid looking at the pictures as I walked along. Didn't want to know what other shit this place was going to pull out of its bag of tricks. As I got about halfway, however, I couldn't stop myself. There was a glint at the corner of my eye and I glanced over to take a look. I immediately wished I hadn't. The woman was leaning down to the boy now, her jaw unhinged to an enormous width as her teeth rested on either side of his head. His cheeks were swollen and red as a thin line of tears streaked down his face. I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired of being fucked with. I jammed my fist into the glass and ripped the photo from its frame, tearing it into pieces before dropping it to the floor. Easy man, don't let it get to you so bad it's just. He trailed off as a noise started echoing in the room, like a fly right in your ear. An incessant buzzing. It was only when I looked down that I saw what it was. The torn shreds of the picture were moving, vibrating. I was about to bend down to inspect them when I heard the same sound coming from the frames on the desk and all of the pictures on the walls. Every single one was moving and shifting. It sounded like we were in an earthquake when suddenly they all stopped. Well, that was weird. Suddenly all the glass shattered at once, covering us in a shower of clear, jagged grains. The pictures flew from their frames. They swirled around us before flying towards the white door. Please tell me I'm not the only one seeing this, I yelled out over the swelling cacophony of the paper smacking against the door, each photo overlaying the other, covering every free space it could find. Trust me, you're not, Wade yelled. His eyes were wide and transfixed before him in terror. I turned back towards the door and saw why. My blood ran cold, the chill of recognition falling over me. The pictures were folding and twisting around each other at such speed that they began to make some semblance of a movie. The woman's face appeared as she was when I first saw her, smiling normal and meaningful. But that quickly began to change. Her eyes bulged as her smile widened to an inhuman size. Her teeth cracked on themselves, forming small serrated daggers that began to hone in on the small boy. His tears were falling in motion now as he was powerless to move. She leaned down and opened her maw, a forked, snake-like tongue twisting and flicking against her now serpentine mouth. Her jaw extended wider, cracking the bones open as she settled it around his head and shoulders. My eyes met his and for one brief moment he moved. His mouth silently mimed, "Help me," as her jaw slammed shut. "What the fuck is this?" I yelled as I clicked the safety off and raised it to the door. She released her jaws, letting the body fall flat and half-eaten, organs strewn on the flowing green grass. Time seemed to fast forward as she turned her attention to Raoul. Her body began to shift and twitch as bones dislocated and shattered. What was once a beautiful young woman turned into a long, flesh-colored serpent, wrapping herself around the man. He stood so still, like a statue, looking out at us as her jaw unhinged once again and she latched onto his head. The snake began undulating and heaving as it worked its way down Raoul's body. He never moved, not even so much as a twitch, before my eyes. The snake had reached his feet and lifted up, completely consuming him. I froze. I didn't know whether to pull the trigger and remove this from my sight or turn and run. Its slitted eyes met mine as it heaved again. Not a sick heave, but a heave of laughter. Its body shifted for the very last time. This time, into the form of a human. It began growing long bone-white appendages for its arms and legs. Its body wrapped itself in a carapace of a lashing white exoskeleton. The final shift was completed by its head slowly bubbling like melted putty as it formed a cone around itself with one single black hole at the center. It stood there with its arms outstretched, its body bending backward at an unnatural angle as it pushed its chest towards the sky. The pictures or camera or whatever the hell this was panned upward. It showed the sun beating down. So much was the intensity that I could nearly feel the heat. And then it was eclipsed. A vine so massive passed in our view as we slowly panned back down. Before us sat a single being. It was covered in its bone-white body. One hand outstretched and delicately, almost lovingly, wrapped around the bud of a flower. Its 6 white petals were each dotted with a single purple mark that seemed to suck in the light and color around it, clogging our vision. "The orchid," I gasped out and started to turn to Wade. "It's not the house doing this. It's not Raoul. It's that fucking orc." I stopped in my tracks. Wade's eyes were glossed over. His machine gun hung limply at his side as he smiled, tears streaming down his face. "Do you see it?" he asked, fighting back tears. "Doesn't it look so beautiful?" "What?" I slapped Wade across the face. "Okay, no. Not here. We're not doing this. Wake the fuck up, man." I snapped my fingers in his ears, shaking him. Nothing worked as he dropped to his knees, like he was kneeling to a higher power. "All she wants is us to grow." He finally turned to me, smiling wide. "To evolve, to become more than we are now." He clutched at me with his massive paws. "We just need to let her in, Marcus." "Wade." I slapped him again, this time harder. "Snap out of it." It was like a toddler throwing a punch at Mike Tyson. Nothing seemed to work. Suddenly, I heard a snap behind me and turned back to the door. The creature in the photos was standing upright now, looking at me, its head cocked to the side. It twitched jarringly back and forth, like a badly puppeteered doll. Then in an instant it leapt at me. It ran so unnaturally. Its legs jerked and popped while its body stayed rigid. And it moved so remarkably fast. I brought my weapon up again, sighting in on it as it reached its long fingers out, grabbing at me. It reached to the forefront of the picture as I fired. I could have sworn that its fingers breached through to the material world. I emptied an entire mag into the door. I heard the splinters of wood as my bullets cut through. Sawdust kicked up as I reloaded and aimed again, waiting to see the creature's body in front of me. But I didn't see it. The thing was gone. The only thing in front of me was a bullet-riddled white door. I heard Wade groan, feeling the ground creak as he sat up. "Ugh, what the hell just happened?" he asked, looking up at me. I reached out to him, extending my hand for him to take. "Nothing, man. Don't worry about it." He eyed me for a moment but grabbed onto me as I helped pull him up. I reached down and picked up his machine gun, thrusting it back into his hands. "Let's go," I said with a sigh, looking away from him and turning to the door. Almost there, I heard the sound of his bolt being pulled back as I began walking. "Right behind you,"